You're listening to a podcast from thespoilist.com. Welcome to First Contact, the Star Trek The Next Generation podcast, coming to you from the darkest possible timeline. I'm Andrew.
I'm James.
And I'm Alex.
This week we have been watching yesterday's Enterprise. It was written by Ira Steven Behr, Richard Manning, Hans Beimler, Ronald D. Moore, Trent Christopher Guinan, and Eric A. Stilwell. It was directed by David Carson. James, what happens in this one?
The Enterprise encounters a time hole, and through it emerges the Enterprise C, and then everything goes wobbly. The departure of this ship from the past has created a new present, one in which Tasha Yar is still alive, and is actually given something to do, and the Federation is fighting a losing war against the Klingon Empire. Guinan knows something is wrong, and thinks Picard should send the Enterprise C back. But is it right to send them to a certain death, where they're defending a Klingon outpost against the Romulans? It's almost like this was a pivotal point in history.
That all sounds very exciting. Alex, you'd never seen this one before. What did you think of it?
Not keen.
Really?
No, I just wanted to piss off some of the listeners. No, clearly it's the best episode we've had so far.
Oh, that's good.
I just wanted to leave the pause and just have people go, oh, for God's sake, I'm done with this. 3 bloody series, and when it finally gets good.
I genuinely thought you'd hate it there. I genuinely thought you'd come up with a reason to hate it.
No, it's very good. I enjoyed it very much. It was almost as if everything that we've had a lot of issues with about subjects not being examined to the degree they should be were all fixed. As if someone had gone through a list of all of those complaints and gone, yep, take those on board, here's how we deal with it.
It is one of the best episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation. I don't think there's any getting away from that, and there shouldn't be any dispute about that, even though it's kind of a what-if scenario. And that's okay, because it's played out so very beautifully. Is there part of you at all that wishes you were watching this timeline all the time?
I kind of get the impression, and it's entirely unjustified because I've never watched the other show, but I kind of get the impression that would be watching Battlestar Galactica.
Yes, I think Ronald Moore, who went on to develop the new Battlestar Galactica, who wrote for this, may have borrowed some stuff. And actually Deep Space Nine takes quite a bit from this episode, including a war with the Klingons, but perhaps more on that in many years to come.
And the idea of losing a war. Being in the middle of a war that they're losing and seemingly may have to surrender.
The big change, actually, when the timeline changes, is the lighting on the Enterprise bridge. Obviously, they've added some different elements to there to make it a bit more like a warship, but that lighting is so great compared to that awful lighting we have to suffer every week, the overlit hotel lobby that is the bridge, and everything just looks so much cooler. It clearly would go on to influence the other Star Trek series, but it seems strange that they didn't maybe incorporate this into later series of The Next Generation, because it looks good, doesn't it?
It's like the difference between Red Dwarf Series 1 and 2 and the later series. They've discovered the dark and how nice things look when you're making use of the shadows and the lights in the dark.
It did seem to influence, I mean, not just Star Trek The Next Generation, because Generations, obviously they made the bridge a lot darker there, but also Deep Space Nine and Voyager and Enterprise, which were all lit up. A lot more subtle a lot more subtlety in the lighting with Deep Space Nine, Voyager and Enterprise. rather than just shine a very bright light at the set.
It's an interesting take on time travel as well, because so often if something is changed, we follow it from the point of view of the people who are changing the past. So if you think of something like City on the Edge of Forever, we know that the Enterprise has gone in the future because of what McCoy and then Kirk do in the past. Or even Star Trek 2009, which probably owes something to this episode as well, where we follow Spock back, and then everything after a certain point, when the Romulans go back in time and destroy the Kelvin, everything is different from then. This stays in the present when the past has changed, and that's absolutely fascinating, because everything we know up to this point is different, and there's this period in Federation history we don't actually know anything about in the run-up to the Next Generation. What was going on with the Klingons? We assume it's been peace since the end of Star Trek 6. Really, what was happening with the Romulans? Apparently they've not been around. It's so much depth and so much to explore, and you have to say, when episodic television can do something this great, it's a shame that it's dismissed so easily now, that episodic is almost said to be something naff and of the past, when you can do such incredible things and tell such great stories in 45 minutes.
It'll go through phases though, won't it? In 20 years' time, we'll have loads of episodic shows on TV, and people will be saying, oh, forget about those shows where we've got to watch more than one episode. These shows now, these modern shows where it's just 45 minutes, they're brilliant and modern, and this is the way to go.
True. Well, let's start at the beginning. Do you like Worf drinking prune juice?
According to Ira Stephen Bear, this is a reference to a novel in which the Klingons are found to enjoy fruit juice.
I was happy when it was finished.
It's perhaps the episode coming in short, because it probably doesn't need that, other than the fact that we want to establish Worf is on the Enterprise and give Michael Dorn something to do this week, because he's going to disappear fairly quickly, and also put in another scene with Guinan, remind everyone that she's this mysterious bartender.
And Troy also disappears, but nobody noticed.
That's true.
Personally, I'd have probably played it different. If I was going for what my take on it would be, I would have some sort of intro where Worf's interacting with the crew, perhaps Geordi, showing how he's an integral part of the team somehow, and him moving towards the bridge, and then say, I don't know, you have him in the lift, and then the ship comes out of the time hole as the lift doors open, and Worf doesn't walk through the doors, it's someone else, and the bridge has changed. And that would be the shift.
That's the whole point of the sequence where he gives the order to Worf, and then we turn around and Picard's blocking, and then when time changes, it's Tasha Yar behind him. That is exactly that.
But it is what they do. I'd link it more into the opening sequence, is the point I'm making. Because the opening sequence just feels stapled on.
It does a bit, but I really love that change of shot, you know, when you do the close-up on Picard, and then it does go a bit wobbly, and then you pull out and Tasha Yar's there, and amazingly you're happy to see Tasha Yar, and who would have ever thought that we would say that? It's great. I was delighted to see Tasha Yar, and it feels like it's been a very long time since we've seen her, even though it hasn't really, and how much the show has changed since season 1 when she departed.
I think you get that with a lot of shows, though. I mean, how many times in, say, Doctor Who, when you have someone return, has it felt like it's been a lifetime since they were in it? But realistically, it's been a year and a half, 2 years.
I suppose we should talk about the plot a bit. So we've got the Enterprise C. Were you happy to see the Enterprise C, this Enterprise that nobody knows anything about? Although the same could obviously be said of B at this point as well.
I like the fact it's used as a sort of chance to fill in some gaps between what we know of the original series. Obviously, we'll get later on some more hints when you get to Generations as to what direction that goes in after the main crew are moving out of the picture. But it's nice to have some sort of little tiny bit of insight into what happens between that and the Next Generation. Right down to their costumes. I really like their costumes. I think it's a nice halfway house.
Which was just a money-saving thing in the end.
Yeah, but it works. It looks like a natural progression.
I also really love that the old badges are comm badges as well, which you just never would assume. I just think that's also a really nice touch as well.
I seem to remember them saying that the costumes are literally those from the films, but without the tunic.
Which, in terms of sort of streamlining a costume, as you might do in reality, that makes logical sense to me. Make it less bulky.
I mean, they didn't need to design a new costume anyway.
On the subject of costumes, what is it that's different about the normal TNG cast's costumes? Because there's something that I can tell is different, but I can't put my finger on what it is.
The collar is different, and so are the cuffs.
It's warm. We need a higher collar.
They've got black cuffs on them, and yeah, it's a higher collar as well.
And I think there's a continuity error that one of the uniforms is still the kind of war version at the end.
The Nitpicker's Guide.
So essentially, the episode does play out. We've got a classic Star Trek morality play. We've got Picard. Can he send this crew back to their deaths? Just on the word of Guinan, because she's a magical space alien who can sense differences in time, which is fine.
That's something I wanted to address, actually. How much are they aware of that at this point? Because it's always felt very vague to me so far.
The only... Well, it's always very vague. I think the only indication is that Q fears her, and that's reason enough to suspect she's more powerful than you might imagine. So,
I mean, the other aspect I suppose we should take into consideration is that none of those experiences with Q have happened here. But there could have been other things, I suppose, with Guinan. Essentially, it's a lot to base your future on, is the vague reckonings of Guinan, unless you can be pretty certain a hunch from her is worth following.
But it is necessary, I think, in the episode. I think you need a reason to send them back, unless they really want to go back, which they probably would anyway. I think you need that. The viewer's position within the episode, someone going, this isn't right, and I think the scenes with Guinan do work. I think the scene between her and Yar is really powerful, and I think really works.
And a bit of fourth wall breaking there as well. Your death was meaningless, senseless.
That was the new writer's opinions on the previous writers.
But isn't that great that they are basically setting right what once went wrong? They are bringing Denise Crosby back, who I think is a very capable performer who wasn't really given the opportunity to do anything other than beg to fire the torpedoes. And they've given her an episode where she gets an arc, she gets something to do, and she gets a meaningful death as well. A proper swan song episode.
Yeah, it's giving the character the rightful send-off that we just didn't get in season 2. You're right. It's making up for that lost ground.
It happens in season 1, but they also make that mistake on the Yesterday's Enterprise commentary and don't pick it up.
God, was it season 1? My God, it feels so long ago.
The original idea for this episode had the crew not change but they all know that Captain Garrett and the Enterprise sea crew, and Captain Garrett was a man at this point, incidentally, they all know that they have to go back, but they all know that the Enterprise sea crew are going to die. But that was the very early version of the script, when it was just a spec script sent in, or just a very early idea.
It's frustrating, this episode, in some ways, because it's such a good idea, and it's so well executed, that this should have been generations.
And they Ira Stephen Bear and Ronald D. Moore, and many of them have said much the same in the past. They've said that essentially what they should have done is have the original series crew be in the position of the Enterprise C, where the Enterprise D has to send them back, and they all die, but they have to do that so this future can exist.
So that's our idea, Patrick. It's going to be a great film. We're going to call it Yesterday's Enterprise. How do you feel? Well, I think it's a good film, but I feel that my character should have a motorbike. Why, Patrick? Well, I quite like motorbikes. And I really feel the film would... But there's no motorbikes in space, Patrick. It doesn't make any sense. I want a damn bike! Actually, is that what's happened with Star Trek Beyond?
Yes, Chris Pine he wouldn't sign the new contract unless he got a motorbike. Again.
Oh, Kirk and his motorbikes. Ugh.
I'm glad it's an episode of The Next Generation. I'm glad it exists, because you probably wouldn't have got the purity of this vision, even though, it's got 6 writing credits on it. And I would say they always all do polishes on it. They work in the writer's room. But this time they want to take credit on it, so that's why all the names are on it.
No, that's not why. It's because the script was just such a rush job that one person would take one act, one person would take another, one person would take another, and it was just such a rush to get this script in time that it was unlike any previous script that they'd done. They all just had to take an element of the episode and do it themselves. Then obviously they'd work on each other's sections, but that is the reason behind all of these writing credits.
Richard Castillo, the love interest for Tasha Yar, and I think that plays out really nicely. This is the first romance I've bought into in Star Trek The Next Generation. I think that's a good, believable relationship, and I'm quite surprised that happened.
No, you're right. It works. It helps that both actors are very comfortable in the roles that they have there. They're performing it very well. But also the script also makes some use of the fact that quite often when we have a love story so far in TNG, it's rushed. You only have the space of one episode to deal with it, and it requires certain logical jumps to move the plot along. This uses it to its strength, however, by playing on the idea of the limited time that they do have, heightening emotions and whatnot. It's a perfect example of making use of the restrictions to make something better.
And it is astonishing that they've managed to do this, despite the fact that it was such a rushed script. It was such a shambles of a writing effort, really. And any other week, this would have been one of the worst episodes that they'd ever made, because it would have just been a rushed mess that they couldn't really analyse in any great depth. But it's almost as if the usual efforts to improve scripts that haven't happened here have made it better.
We also are at a stage where you've got guys like Ron Moore and Ira Bear working on the scripts who are, whether they're, a bit rough around the edges at this point or not, are really good writers. And that makes a difference. And if the ship is being steered by Michael Piller, who I guarantee would have done a polish on this as well, you get better episodes. And also, you've got David Carson, who is probably the best director who worked on Star Trek: The Next Generation as well.
Just on the subject of a good script and what makes it work, and just going back to the element of the love story, just to pick out one particular scene where I feel that it really comes off, and the direction as well, and the acting, because it's done pretty subtly, is the scene with "What's your name?" Well, my mother calls me Richard. Yada yada yada. I think I'd like it better if you called me Richard. I think that's the kind of scene that in so many of the other episodes we would have been absolutely disparaging over. And yet here, I found it very easy to invest in.
It just feels natural, and these actors do have a good, easy chemistry, and there's possibly that element of the doomed romance as well, because we know as viewers that she shouldn't be alive, and that's, no matter what, she's not going to exist again fairly soon. And we know that these guys have got to go back. They've got to face their destiny. They have got to be attacked by the Romulans as well. And that just works. It puts that ticking clock on it. And in an episode where actually, because it is this scenario that it's just a potential timeline in some ways, where we shouldn't invest in the characters because we know it's going to get reset at the end. We know this. But you can invest in these characters because it's the guest cast that actually make this work. You still have the regular crew pretty much doing their thing, but it's so important to have Tasha Yar in this episode. You can't emphasise that enough, because you need to invest in her fate and the tragedy of her life in order to make this episode resonate emotionally, in order for you to care about it.
I would certainly agree that for the majority of the main cast, it's business as normal, even in this alternate timeline. Picard is perhaps the one that you could argue it's a slightly different case. We definitely have a harder Picard here, far more willing to dismiss what Riker has to say out of hand. And actually, some of my favourite parts of the episode, obviously all of the Tasha Yar stuff is fantastic. But again, to pick out a moment in the episode, one of my favourites is Picard turning and saying, actually, the war's going very badly. I think there's something about the fact that we've always seen Picard in some sort of way to always be one of the stronger characters. Always resolute, never really one to show fear or anything like that. To suddenly see him be that candid, it's kind of shocking in a way.
Well, absolutely. I suppose Picard is in some ways defined by this sense of duty. He's not a family man, he's a Starfleet career man. And he's pragmatic. He will do whatever he needs to do to get the job done. But that can be twisted into quite a dark character, I suppose. One who has to be callous with lives and give that particular order. But still, he is still Picard, because he weighs that up. Can he send people to their deaths? And, he still has to have that conversation. Even in this terrible timeline, in this war, he still considers every possible angle, even though he does have that slightly darker edge to him.
And this is why we needed Guinan to be the one who essentially says they need to go back. Because you couldn't have our Picard, or even, as one of the original ideas for the episode was, have the Enterprise D change, but have Riker and Geordi be off on a shuttlecraft and return to find time has changed. You can't have our characters making these decisions. They need to be twisted by this dark future.
No, I think that's right. I think what you need to see is that even in the worst scenario, the inherent character traits of the crew will still shine through for them to make those tough decisions, and indeed ultimately make the right decisions. The episode is is like the perfect analysis of that much lauded phrase from Star Trek: the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Sometimes, as we've seen previously, that's been analysed very badly. This is the polar opposite of that. It's explored very well, with all of the ramifications of that really taken into consideration.
And the only criticism of this episode I ever see is it's a red button episode. And I see that about so many episodes. And then I think of some of my favourite Star Trek episodes. I think of the Voyager episode Timeless, or the Voyager episode A Year in Hell. And I think of this, and I think of my absolute favourite 45 minutes of Star Trek, the Enterprise episode Twilight. All of those red button episodes, and all of those some of the best Star Trek ever made. Why do people hate red button episodes just out of hand?
If you think of something like Buffy's The Wish, which is very similar to this, or Doctor Who's Turn Left, which just take a potential timeline, and it's cool and it's fun, because you can do stuff like killing Riker off in this episode. You have to do that. I think it can be cheap, and I think it can be annoying. Something like the season 3 finale of Doctor Who, where you reset that entire Earth where the Master's taken over, and it just feels like they've not earned that reset. But this, as I said before, I think because of the Yar storyline, there is a tangible emotional investment, because that invests you in this new timeline as well, and in some ways you don't want that to go away because you care.
I think the way that they handle the ending helps as well. The fact that with that Doctor Who episode that you refer to, at the end of that, the world forgets, but for everyone on board the Valiant, they all remember. Hence why the Master gets shot. Here, however, no one remembers. Although Guinan is aware that something has happened, but it's not suggested that she has intimate knowledge of all of the events. Just that something has changed, and something involving Tasha Yar. I kind of feel that by not having any of the crew remember the events, the episode does better, because if it had that ending on it where they had remembered, and they'd all sort of gone, well, we've really learned a lesson here, and then just fly off to the next episode where they make those mistakes again, it would have been totally flubbed. It wouldn't have felt earned. But because they don't remember, there's just something about that to me that makes it feel worthwhile.
Yeah, it would be a real shame if they did a kind of sequel to this. It really wouldn't work.
What, last week's Enterprise?
No. I mean, imagine if you sort of completely diminished the sacrifice of a major character by having a sequel to it. Imagine if you did that.
But they'd never do that. They'd never look at this episode and think it's absolutely perfect. What we need is a bit more like it.
But not quite good. The other thing I'd like to mention is the models and the miniatures, which are beautiful, and Next Generation's pretty good for this. I don't think we got to appreciate at the time how good these shots were, because all the compositing was done on video and it didn't look great in standard definition. It looked fine, but now when we've got these HD remasters, it's all gorgeous, and I quite like the Enterprise C as the sort of stubby little sister ship of the Enterprise D. Nice to see, and you obviously have the Klingon warbirds as well. It's all good, you know. It's petty to pick at anything.
But that's where Quickfire comes in.
Quickfire.
One of the ideas they rejected for this episode is that Worf would have appeared either on the view screen or in the background or over the comm as a Klingon officer ordering their surrender. But they basically realised that probably wouldn't have been a very good idea and didn't do it.
So yeah, to nitpick, at the end of the episode, when Geordie's talking with Guinan, he has the wrong uniform on. But you shouldn't notice that because you're so invested in the episode. And if you want to pick at that, you're a fool. A fool, I tell you.
Or there was some sort of time rip and an evil Geordie has entered our universe.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a novel about that.
Or a fan film, which has now been cancelled because it costs too much. They kickstarted a £2 million budget film about Geordie's collars.
Well, I mean, yeah, you do kind of have to be a bit of a prick to nitpick at this episode. So let's turn to the biggest pricks among the bunch with the Nitpicker's Guide for Next Generation Trekkers, who state, Worf explains that he would require a Klingon woman for companionship. Human females are too frail. From that comment, they are presumably talking about sex. Thanks for the insight, guys.
Picard does not call Riker number 1 in the new timeline. He in fact calls him Commander, showing that they're not really close. I don't know if number 1 is a sign of affection, but nice differences, lots of nuance.
So Star Trek The Next Generation 365 has some quotes from Ira Stephen Burr talking about the script writing process. It's quite interesting, well, to me anyway, that there's mention that there was a thought that at the end of the episode we'll have Picard alone firing phasers in the smoke of the burning bridge, and that's how we'll go out. Everyone said, okay, we're unhappy and we can't kill the episode, but we can kill the characters. So we wrote great death scenes, and then of course we weren't able to do them because of the production time and costs, he says with a sigh. Do you think it would have benefited from the death scenes? I mean, we'd have been getting into the realm of out of time on Red Dwarf, really, as we see the crew dying one by one until maybe just Picard's left.
We get the shot of Riker dead on the floor. I think that's pretty much as it needs to go.
I think it would probably overshadow what the actual point of the episode is, and it would be cool. And they do that in other shows. They do that on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and it's great. But no, I don't think we really needed it here.
It would overshadow the actual sacrifice that is taking place.
Yes, I think that's right. I mean, I thought they might blow up the Enterprise, to be honest. I was watching this, I've seen this many times, but I thought, oh, I wonder if it explodes. But it doesn't, and they could have done that, but there's no need to do that. It's just because you can doesn't necessarily mean that you should. This is the last time Will Wheaton and Denise Crosby will appear in an episode together, although both will be back. And I don't know why I'd say that, because, you know, Wesley's not left.
Well, they seem to share a haircut in this episode as well. I've got the episode playing in the background, and I just got to that moment where Geordie's talking to them from engineering and the antimatter, it's all going wrong. He literally turns to camera to deliver some of that dialogue. I hadn't noticed that before.
Well, thanks once again for listening. We can only assume it's all downhill from here. We'll be back again next time when we'll be talking about The Offspring. We're all looking forward to that one. But for now, goodbye.
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 Shall we talk a bit about the Enterprise C crew? We've got Captain Garrett, who seems like the model for Janeway, someone who won't ever listen to a doctor or lie down or get any sleep, and therefore makes terrible decisions.
But without a name that sounds like a sanitary towel. I always think Janeway sounds like some sort of feminine hygiene product. Moving swiftly on.